Hello out there. I am talking to small business owners this week. Do you own a small business? I do, right? Well, I got some questions for you. And I'm sure you've thought about these things, but I think these questions are central to what we're talking about today. So, you've given them any thought? How long do you want to work? Well, what about retirement? What happens if something happens to you? Do you have somebody that's ready to step in and carry on and keep the business moving? What worse, what happens if you die? What happens to your business? What happens to all those investments you've made over the years? That sweat equity, not to mention the value, right, that you've built in your business over time. Is there anybody else that can run the business? If it's a family business, does your family want to get in the family business? A lot of them don't. Who's going to run your business? What about those employees? If you've got employees who are depending on being paid, continuing to be paid, right? They're relying on that. How do you manage all this? And these are questions a lot of people don't think about very often. They're tough ones. And I think this is important in terms of this podcast, which is, of course, aimed at baby boomers, because aging adults, boomers out there, 41% of privately owned businesses in the United States are owned by boomers. So this is an important topic, and there's some really critical issues that we're going to talk about today. So please stick with me. You'll be glad you did. But in the meantime, I did want to touch on a few headlines that I noticed over the past few days. Some of them common sense, but I think it's always good to be reminded of things that are good for you, right? How about this one? 5 subtle signs you're aging well. I want to know that. And some red flags that you shouldn't dismiss. So this is from the New York Post, and they say a strong grip means you got better muscle mass, cardiovascular health, and longevity. Well, those are important things, right? You move around with ease. You're not stiff and immobile. Of course, these are things that we talk about all the time, but the experts recommend that you do exercise, moderate exercise, 2 or more days a week. I've talked about the importance of exercise before. I know, includes me. Quick recovery from viruses and infections. If you got something that's just lingering and lingering, go to the doctor. Your immune system may be needing some extra help, or it might be something else. But if you can't get over something, could be a sign that there's something else going on. Good mood. Hey, good mood and good libido. Those are always good signs, right? Those hormones decline as we age, but you're still looking for love. That's a good sign. As long as you stay true to your mate. A sharp mind, increased forgetfulness, confusion, poor concentration, personality disorders. Those can be signs of some kind of brain function decline. Your brain's like a muscle. You can keep strengthening it by learning new things. So if you're into this, there's a few aging tests you can do at home, but I don't want you falling or taking any kind of risks, but just listen. Okay, sit on the floor and try to stand up without using your hands. I've tried to do this before. It's not as easy as it sounds. But if you can do that, that means you're aging pretty well. You're on the positive side of things. Sit down in a chair, okay? And see if you can stand. That can be a problem. Sit and stand 30 times in that chair. And if you have difficulty, that means your legs need some strengthening. Put your hand flat on the table and use your other hand to pinch up your skin between your thumb and your first digit. And the skin should quickly return to its original position. If it doesn't, it may mean you're dehydrated. Remember, you got to drink a lot of water. And stand on one foot with your eyes open and your arms out for 30 seconds. See if you can do it. So do it with supervision, I would say, because as you know, falls are one of the biggest problems when it comes to aging and hurting yourself. So that, I actually have a story about falls, and there is some new technology. This is coming from U.S. News and World Report. Some technology that may help you with balance and strength. Of course, they're citing AI, but I do think AI may have results in offering some things that are more helpful in monitoring and helping with mobility. I've seen some of those things on the internet, and they're pretty incredible. So I thought that was interesting. And then got two more quick ones that I'll just go through with you. So Americans are living longer. That's something I've talked about before, but many people are underestimating how long they're going to live. Well, aging in seniors because of the Silver Tsunami is supposed to surge by 40% in the next 25 years. And this is from CBS News and their Money Watch. Problem is, a lot of people don't budget well enough for their retirement. They don't know how long they're going to live. And here's just an idea. The 65-year-old woman has a 40% chance of living to 90, while men the same age have a 30% chance of reaching that age. And that's according to some new research that's out from John Hancock Life Insurance and the MIT up in Boston Age Lab. So they're studying those things. But again, this is central to what I say all the time about being mindful, planning, and making sure that you've got a plan in place so that you don't run out of money or that it goes as long as you can. Finally, there was a story from the Wall Street Journal. I like the stories they have. This one was talking about new trends or new housing options for older Americans. And hey, it says that multi-generational homes are becoming more popular. I haven't seen any of those around here. I do hear about them occasionally, but it would be something that's private. But you're living among people of different ages. Hey, that can keep you young sometimes. People might like that. So, plus you'd have somebody strong that maybe can help you with the groceries coming into the house. So I'm going to post some of these stories online, and if you're interested, you can go take a look and let me know what you think. So I want to go back to small businesses and boomers and why you need to spend some time thinking about this. Stick with me. I will be right back. Well, welcome back. We are talking small businesses today. And this is an area where a lot of us live most of our lives. I've got a small business. Maybe you do. Maybe your parents do. Lots of us spend a lot of time working on an independent business that we have. And, it's important what happens with the business. You want it to be successful. You want it to grow. You want to make money, right? Well, a lot of people haven't thought about what happens if something happens to you. And what happens if something happens to you, and who's going to run the business? What about all those people that rely on you and are dedicated to the business? It deserves some thought. I was surprised to see, well, sort of surprised, but that 41% in the U.S. are private-owned businesses that are owned by boomers. So these are people on the graying side of the book, right? They're thinking about maybe 4 or 5 more years. Maybe you're winding things down. Have you even come up with a plan for winding things down? We need to do this because those numbers translate to about 12 million businesses nationwide that employ over 25 million workers. 1 in 6 jobs in the American economy. And 60% of those lack any kind of formal exit plan. That means when you can't do it anymore, or, you need to slow down, what happens to the business? What happens to everybody that's supporting it? This is a serious issue. It is. This is $10 trillion to our economy. So it matters. It matters if you work. And those of you out there that are just maybe on the starting end of a small business, you want to think about these things, as you get started. You want to have those deep roots, right? You want to have those roots placed and know where you're going, right? You want to go up, but you got to have some benchmarks, have some do's and do nots. I've got them. And, it's the best way to keep yourself on track. And if you know where you're going, right, it makes it not easier, but it makes it more visionary. You know where you're going, you got directions to go there. So, but the point is, there is so much wealth that is going to be transferred with some of the older adults. You may be caring for your parents and they won't give up working, maybe, and they've got this small business. Maybe it's a family business. Maybe they won't quit because nobody else wants to take over the family business. I want to offer you some options today because this is the kind of stuff that needs to be included in your estate plan. You built all that wealth over the years. Don't piss it away, right? Don't let it drain away. You need to preserve your investment, whether it's sweat equity or whether it's just the value of the business, right? So that requires a plan. A business has value. How do you preserve that? Are you going to liquidate it? Do you know how much it's worth? Do you know who would buy it? These are all things that are available, are accessible, are things that you really need to think about. I think about, for instance, what happens to your client base? What happens to all those people out there that I help? You are important to me. And I try to think of the unknowns. And if you sat down with me, you know that I plainly say, if something happens to me, here's the plan I've got in place so that you have somebody I trust that can back you up. So these are important things. A couple different ways to, of course, tackle these issues, but really it's often overlooked. I saw in Forbes magazine that only 1/3, 30%, right, of family businesses make a successful transition. That's not a very good number. So that's 30% from the initial family business entrepreneur to the next generation. It's only 30%. And we want to know what happens to the next generation, grandkids? Only 3% carry on the torch. And it may be that things have changed. Businesses change, needs change, maybe interests change, but still, this is something valuable that you need to spend some time thinking about. So, ironically, 72% of small business owners want to keep the business in the family. So if you want to do that and really only 3% end up doing it, you got to give it some thought and you got to give it a plan, right? You got to get those grandkids interested in the business. And you got to come up with a way to have it move forward. And I do that kind of stuff with estate planning. If you don't, it can lead to some messy and uncomfortable problems. Everything from paying too much tax to people being unemployed to, creditors and customers, people that are suppliers. All of them will get kind of cranky, right? And then it can create some real legal issues. So right now the problem is so pervasive when it comes to small businesses that here in Hamilton County, where I am, business interests, if they're flagged in the estate as part of creating a probate, well, the Chancery Court, has now had a protocol where they appoint a receiver to every single one of those cases. It's because they care about that investment. They've got to protect that value. It could be something as simple as a process or evaluating the business, and that the receiver comes back and says it's continuing as it needs to, there's a plan in place, and so forth. Or if everything shuts down and goes to a halt, it could become a very complex, expensive process. You could face claims galore that need to be processed after the death of the owner. Does it need to keep running? Does it need to be sold? The receiver would make a recommendation to the court. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. Do something better, okay? It's better if you make the plan, right? If you make the plan, then there are more options. Don't leave it to the court. Don't leave it to the government. So there's possible tax issues. We currently have a federal estate tax that is about $14 million. I don't know a lot of people that have $14 million, and it's $28 million per couple. But when you have a business, those numbers can accrue quickly. So, like I said, you have to kind of think about these things ahead of time. Have a plan in place. Whether you've got a DBA, or it's just a pickup business, have a plan in place. You may have accounts receivable, things like that have not been collected, and say something happens to you, your family's depending on that money. If you've got 100% member registered entity, it could be an LLC, but it's just you. You need a plan. You need a plan. You had a business plan when you started, right? So you need a plan on the back end. You need to finish well. It may surprise you, like I said, those numbers nationwide show that this has the potential of really impacting communities. You've seen those communities out there that had the one factory town, right? And the company pulled out, and look what happened to the community. It doesn't show much life after that. So I want you to benefit from your investment, and I want it to be practical and easy for the business to continue if that's what you want, or to have somebody in place that can take over. So here in Tennessee, because I'm in Tennessee, I wanted to look at the numbers as far as small business is concerned. So got a snapshot off the Tennessee.gov website. Did you know that in the state of Tennessee, there are almost 500,000 people with small businesses? 471,316 in little old Tennessee. That's everything, like I said, from a big company that run by a CEO to a paint shop on the corner. Those companies have employees. Over 100,000 of them have employees. These are people that are invested and reliant, right? So you have to have some considerations for them. And if you're interested, it is a diverse group of business owners. 105,000 are minority-owned businesses. 195,000, almost 200,000, are female-owned businesses. That's been a real growth area. And nearly 60,000 are veteran-owned businesses. Small businesses, you've heard the politicians say it, but it's true. Imagine that. Small businesses are really what runs our communities. The SBA, Small Business Administration, said that there are approximately 33.2 million to almost 35 million small businesses in the United States. And did you know that makes up 99.9% of all businesses in the country? We hear about the big guys all the time. That's kind of what dominates the news. But the little guys are the foundation. You're the foundation. And these businesses employ around 59 million people. Those are big numbers. So it deserves some thought. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because it is a often overlooked part of planning. You need personal planning, right, for your body. You need business planning for whatever you've invested your life in. And as part of that, you need wealth transfer planning. The boomers represent the biggest wealth transfer in the history of this country. So we got to prepare. This is something we've never seen before. You hear unprecedented all the time, but this is unprecedented. In the next 10 to 15 years, 70% of all small businesses will change ownership. That's significant, people, isn't it? What do you think? 90% are family owned, managed. So if you take the other numbers that I talked about before, there's going to be a real drop off. If we don't have plans in place to keep these businesses going, this is nearly half of the gross national product. This is why this kind of stuff makes me upset and makes me nervous. We've got to do something. So why aren't people planning? Well, I think it's the same thing as estate planning for you people out there. You don't want to deal with it, right? Maybe there's some emotional attachment. Your personal identity is your business. I know my business is near and dear to my heart. You know that. And you know that I care deeply about what I do. So that can translate into part of my personal identity. Of course, there's a lot of other things in my life that can, get included in that too. But yeah, maybe it's, represents your life's work. It's a core part of your identity. And it's, the legacy, the thing that drove you when you started, and letting go of it can be emotionally challenging. Well, maybe find someone who's interested in what you're doing, maybe a worker there, and start mentoring them, training them, right? See who's interested. You may be surprised if they can carry the torch for you and it's not the traditional family member. You got time to look at it. So there's no clear successor oftentimes. And that, again, family members may not be interested in taking over the business, right? And I said the adult children may, but then when you get to the grandkids, the third generation, they are not interested. Financial unpreparedness, that is another reason. So you don't know how valuable your business is. What's the cost basis? What's the liability column say? What does your capital column say? What are your expenses? How are you going to wind that down? This isn't stuff you can do on your own, but, you've got people like me and you've got accountants, you've got business valuation companies. There are people out there that can help. You just have to plan. So I think you've got my message, right? So you need to plan sooner or later. And the decisions, they're going to be made, but why not make them good ones for you? I've got some optimistic, important steps that can help with you starting to think about this. So I think that's probably how I'll leave it, because I've talked about a lot of things today. But I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I want to just give you some nuggets, some seeds to think about in terms of your exit plan, how to protect your business. What's next? What's next for your alter ego, right? Your small business. It deserves some thought. So I'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm going to pick on lawyers, okay? Because I know a lot of them, right? And I is one. So, a good example of small businesses and exit plans and things like that are lawyers. Because if they're out there, they would agree with me. I'm fairly confident, right? That we're always thinking about the end date, but somehow that just gets kicked down the road further and further, right? And I know several attorneys here who I respect and care about. Well, they retired, but not really. They're still working. So I don't want you to be doing any kind of fake retirement. That's not how to retire. But lawyers are just infamous for that kind of stuff. Trust me. But if you're like that, think about some of the things we've talked about today. And how can you pass it on? How can you have it planned for a nice, good ending, nice vesting to someone else, perhaps? So that's kind of what I was going to end with, was some important steps to start thinking about your exit plan. If you're 5 years away, that's not too far to start thinking about these things. Maybe you want to retire at 40, right? Maybe you want to retire at 50. Maybe you want to retire at 60, 70, whatever it is. 5 years before that, take out the pad, start thinking about some of these things. So I mentioned this before, but find out how much your business is really worth. Chances are you may underestimate it. You need a professional valuation. Knowledge is power, right? You need to know how much it's worth now. And what about the end game? How much is it going to be worth in 5 years? How can you make it more valuable? SOPs, standard operating procedures, make sure you have those down. Have a transition team in place. You have any of the best and brightest in your office? Take them out to lunch and talk to them about what their plan is for the future. And look at the tax consequences. Look at the tax consequences. So there's a lot more to it, but if you start thinking about these things, and then I can talk more about some of the options you have in terms of making that transition or having that end plan. We'll do that in another episode. So look for some more resources that I have for you on my website, nancycogar.com. And remember, like and subscribe to the podcast. That way you will never miss an episode. Hey, share it with a friend. This is important information. It affects a lot of people. Help me help you. So I will see you again, and take care. And I hope that this gives you some good food for thought.